This is wave number 3, and right now, across the apple and peach orchards of Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, and Virginia, that third hit of cold is landing on vegetation that's already been through the ringer. Plants sitting at the fruitlet stage of development. The precise moment that will make or break the entire 2026 harvest before summer has even bothered to show up. Most people have no idea how much the fruitlet stage actually matters. Here's the short version. Once a blossom gets pollinated and the petals fall off, the fruit doesn't just appear. It starts life as a tiny, fragile green nub called a fruitlet. Now, fruitlets are a little tougher than open blossoms, which can be wiped out at 28 degrees Celsius or even slightly warmer. But don't let that fool you into thinking they're bulletproof. On normal, healthy plant tissue, a hard frost dipping below 28 degrees can kill fruitlets stone dead. And on tissue that's already been smacked by 2 previous frost events? The danger zone creeps even higher. A reading of 30 degrees on a fruitlet that already sat through 31 degrees 11 days ago is a completely different animal from 30 degrees on a fresh, healthy fruitlet enjoying a normal spring. Each cold event chips away at the plant's ability to fight back. The damage stacks up like debt. Orchard managers across the Great Lakes and the Appalachian corridor have been in battle mode since late April. They're heading into this weekend knowing that the difference between salvaging a partial crop and watching an entire season collapse could come down to just 3 or 4 degrees on Saturday morning. That's a razor-thin margin with enormous consequences. For vineyards, it's just as grim, maybe worse. Grapevine shoots across the Finger Lakes, the Hudson Valley, Virginia wine country, and the Lake Erie AVA have already pushed out 4 to 6 inches of new growth, encouraged by the warm spell that rolled through just before this cold wave arrived. And here's the cruel part. Each of the previous cold events forced the vines to give up on their primary buds, the ones that carry the best, most productive fruit, and fall back on secondary and tertiary buds, which are basically the understudies. They'll do a job, but not nearly as well. Wave 3, crashing down on vines that are already limping along on backup systems after 2 rounds of cold damage, could push some of the region's most storied vineyards past the point where the 2026 vintage makes any financial sense at all. It's a brutal reality of wine growing that most people who enjoy a glass on a Friday night never have to think about. The character of a whole wine region's vintage can hinge on a single week in May. This is that week. For home gardeners across the Ohio Valley, the Mid-Atlantic, and the Northeast, the threat feels closer and more personal. Every tomato, pepper, eggplant, basil, cucumber, and squash that went into the ground during April's freakishly warm weather has now been through 2 cold nights already. And here's the thing people tend to miss. Those plants that pulled through aren't the same plants you carefully tucked into the soil a few weeks ago. They've taken hits. Their cellular structure has been stressed and strained. Their growing tips may already be showing damage you haven't fully noticed yet. And now, before the weather pattern finally gives it a rest, they're being asked to survive a 3rd cold night. A tomato plant that loses its growing tip in the 3rd week of May doesn't just bounce back and carry on as normal. Sure, it can regrow from side shoots, but the calendar doesn't wait. Fruit that should have set in late June now sets in late July instead. In the northern half of the country, where the growing season has a hard stop in fall, every week lost in spring is a week of production you never get back. It's not dramatic, it's just quietly devastating. Here's exactly what you need to do in the next 12 hours. Get your warm season vegetables covered before sunset tonight. Not before you go to bed. Before sunset, while you still have enough light to do it right. Frost cloth, row covers, old bed sheets you don't mind using, even upturned buckets placed over individual seedlings. All of these work, because they trap the warmth the soil has been quietly collecting all day and hold it close to the plant through the night. The ground doesn't just dump all its heat the moment the sun goes down. It releases it slowly, and a covered plant gets to benefit from that gentle, steady warmth radiating upward through the dark hours. The key is to cover early. By the time you can actually see frost forming on the ground, the temperature has already been sitting at or below 30 degrees long enough to have done real cellular damage. You're not preventing frost at that point. You're just watching it happen. Check the National Weather Service frost advisory for your specific county tonight and again tomorrow morning. Not your state, not your general area, your county. Frost doesn't follow state borders, it follows the land. Elevation changes, river valleys, urban heat pockets, proximity to large bodies of water. All of these create real, meaningful temperature differences within a surprisingly small area. A town 20 miles from a Great Lake might sit comfortably at 35 degrees, while an inland valley just 10 miles further drops to 29 degrees. The NWS issues frost and freeze forecasts at the county zone level for exactly this reason. Know your zone. Check it before dark. For orchard managers, this is absolutely not the weekend to sit back and hope for the best. Before Wave 3 arrives, cut cross-sections of your developing fruitlets and look for browning inside the seed cavity. That dark discoloration is the unmistakable sign of freeze-killed embryo tissue. Get a clear picture of your current damage percentage before Saturday morning piles on more. This isn't just about managing your emotions. It matters for crop insurance documentation, for deciding how to handle water and irrigation going forward, and for making honest, clear-eyed decisions about what the 2026 harvest is actually going to look like before you pour more money and labor into a crop that may already be below the point of economic return. Hard information now is far kinder than a nasty surprise in July. Here's the bigger picture of where things stand. The frost arriving this weekend is not, technically, the worst event of this spring. The hard freezes back in late April, when temperatures plunged into the upper 20s across the northern plains, were more severe on paper. But raw numbers aren't the whole story. Not even close. What makes this weekend's frost so dangerous isn't the temperature by itself. It's the position it occupies in a sequence. Third wave, 10th day, already stressed tissue, already damaged fruitlets, cell membranes that have been battered twice over, doing their level best to hold it together through one more cold night on plants that April completely convinced were in the clear. There's an old farmer's proverb that says, "One frost kills the blossom. 3 frosts kill the hope." The science behind that saying is precisely what this situation is playing out in real time. Cumulative cold injury is real, it's well documented, and it's directly relevant to everything arriving this weekend across the Midwest and Northeast. The frost advisory isn't the Weather Service being overly cautious or covering its bases. It is a specific forecast for specific temperatures that will cause specific damage to specific plants, in a spring that has already pushed those plants right to the edge of what they can take. But there's another dimension to all of this that goes beyond gardens and orchards, and it deserves to be said clearly. The northern plains, the Dakotas, Nebraska, northern Kansas are also looking at below freezing temperatures this weekend, with some spots dropping to 29 to 31 degrees temperatures. The winter wheat growing in those fields right now is not dormant. It is actively growing, sitting at the jointing and boot stages, the critical reproductive window when the developing grain head is pushing its way upward through the stem and is at its most vulnerable to cold injury. A freeze during the boot stage doesn't just nick the current tiller, it kills the primary grain head outright, forcing the plant to scramble and attempt grain fill on secondary tillers that simply can't match the yield of the original. 3 cold events hitting the northern plains during these exact growth stages, which is precisely what May 2026 has delivered, will show up in the USDA crop condition reports over the coming weeks. And when the combines roll through those fields in June and July, the yield data will tell the rest of the story. For the northern plains, this weekend's frost isn't a garden story or even an orchard story. It's a food supply story, and barely anyone in the national media is talking about it. Let me tell you about something that happened 3 days ago in central Indiana that didn't make a single national headline. A fourth-generation apple orchard just outside of Martinsville, a place that survived the devastating Easter freeze of 1945, weathered the infamous Black Saturday frost of 2012, and came through every cold snap this century has thrown at the Great Lakes fruit belt, lost an estimated 60% of its developing fruitlets overnight, not from a historic hard freeze, not from a polar vortex event. From 31 degrees? 31 degrees on the third cold night of May, on tissue that had already been through 2 earlier frost events, on an orchard that April's record warmth had pushed 3 full weeks ahead of its normal development schedule, the owner told a local reporter. It wasn't the temperature that killed them. It was what came before it. That sentence is the entire story of what is arriving this week. Today is the day to pay attention, not tomorrow when the frost advisories get upgraded. Not Saturday morning when you walk outside and find blackened, wilted foliage and your heart sinks. Today, while the sky is still clear and you still have time to act. Here's the meteorological setup. A reinforcing shot of cold Canadian air is pushing south across the upper Midwest and Ohio Valley over the next 48 hours. The surface high-pressure building in behind the cold front is dry and dense, and that combination means radiational cooling overnight will be fast and efficient. Clear skies, calm winds, low humidity, and a strong surface, high all working together, means the ground loses its stored heat to the atmosphere at the maximum possible rate after sunset. Temperatures won't drift lazily toward frost. They'll slide quickly downward through the late evening hours and hit their lowest point just before dawn, when the surface has had the longest possible time to radiate away the warmth of the day. Frost advisory level temperatures, the low to mid-30s, are expected across Indiana, Ohio, Kentucky, much of Pennsylvania, New York State, and interior New England by Saturday morning. Potentially Sunday morning as well before the pattern finally eases up. Those numbers don't sound alarming by themselves. 32 ADF in March on dormant plants is a complete non-event. But 32 ADF in mid-May, arriving as the 3rd consecutive cold wave, on plants that April firmly reassured were past the danger zone, on tissue that's been cold stressed twice in the span of 10 days. That is an entirely different situation. And the difference isn't subtle. It's the difference between a rough night and a season-ending one for a significant chunk of agricultural production across the eastern United States. Let's talk about what's actually happening inside the plant. Because understanding the biology changes how seriously you take a frost advisory. When temperatures fall below 32 degrees Celsius, the water sitting in the spaces between plant cells begins to freeze. The ice crystals that form there pull water out of the cells themselves through osmosis, causing the cells to dehydrate and their membranes to tear. When the temperature climbs back up in the morning and the ice melts, those ruptured cells leak their contents. That's the wilted, water-soaked, translucent damage you see on frost-killed tissue. The black collapse of a tomato plant the morning after a hard frost isn't the frost killing the plant right in front of you. It's the cellular wreckage from the night before becoming visible as things warm up. Now think about what happens when that process occurs twice. A plant that survives a frost event is left with a mix of damaged cells and surviving cells, and it immediately throws its energy into repairs. The new growth it produces after that first frost event has no cold hardening whatsoever. It's the most tender, most vulnerable tissue the plant has made all season, grown in the confident assumption that the cold chapter is over because warm spring weather followed close behind. When the second frost wave rolls in on that brand new tender growth, the damage threshold is even lower. And when the third wave arrives on top of that, you're not dealing with a frost-tolerant plant anymore. You're dealing with a plant that has been borrowing from reserves it no longer has. Cover your garden tonight. Check your orchard tomorrow morning. Watch the NWS forecast for your county through the weekend. And understand this: the restless, swinging, cold, then warm, amplified atmosphere that has defined every single week of this extraordinary spring does not stop just because the calendar insists it should be warm by now. It just arrives quietly in the dark. Right in the middle of all this chaos, the Midwest gets handed a genuinely lovely stretch of weather. A brief, peaceful window sitting between the mess behind us and the mayhem ahead. But parked at the end of this week like a freight train that's been picking up speed for days is a serious, severe weather outbreak aimed squarely at the southern plains, followed almost immediately by a heat dome that could rewrite record books across the heart of the United States. 5 separate stories. 1 week. Let's walk through all of them. First, Mississippi deserves more than a footnote. We need to go back to May 6th. Because what happened in Mississippi hasn't been fully reckoned with, and it would be wrong to just glide past it on our way to the next headline. Parts of Mississippi got hammered last week, badly, and the complete picture is only now coming into sharp focus. The National Weather Service has confirmed at least 7 to 9 tornadoes from that system, and 2 of them were rated EF3. One of those EF3s carried winds topping 137 to an km/h. Let's be honest about what that actually means. That's not a storm that topples a few trees and scatters lawn furniture. That is a storm that strips homes clean off their foundations and permanently alters the trajectory of people's lives. And that is precisely what it did. The Storm Prediction Center logged roughly 100 reports from this single system alone. Tornadoes, large hail, destructive winds. 6 particularly dangerous situation tornado warnings were issued, along with 4 separate tornado emergencies. Meteorologists do not reach for those labels casually. A tornado emergency means there is a confirmed, life-threatening tornado bearing down on a populated area, and people need to move to shelter right now. 4 of those in a single event tells you everything you need to know about how terrifying that day truly was. At least 20 people were injured. Thankfully, no fatalities have been confirmed, but hundreds of homes were damaged and several communities were shredded in a matter of minutes. Here's the part worth sitting with. Much of this destruction unfolded in rural areas and small towns, the kinds of places that don't draw news cameras or earn national airtime, places that can quietly slip through the cracks once the media cycle moves on and recovery is only just beginning. The damage there is just as real. The need is just as urgent. Those families are still in the thick of it right now, even as we're here sizing up what's coming next. Don't let them become a footnote. Second, a fire threat flying. Under the radar now, let's shift to a developing situation that is getting almost zero national attention, and it genuinely should be. If you live in eastern Montana or western North Dakota, around Dickinson, Williston, or anywhere along or north of the Interstate 94 and Highway 12 corridors, your biggest weather threat this week has nothing to do with thunderstorms. It's fire, and it is escalating quickly. A fire weather watch is in effect for today and tomorrow across this region, and the conditions fueling it are about as dangerous a combination as you can assemble. A cold front is pushing through, hauling winds of 25 to 35 mph with gusts reaching up to 45 mph. Relative humidity is collapsing. We're talking values tumbling to around 15%. And the grass out there is as parched as it has been in a very long time. Fuel dryness is sitting near the 97th percentile. The ground is essentially primed and ready to ignite. All it needs is a single spark. What makes this situation especially alarming is the signal for isolated high-base thunderstorms to develop in this region today and possibly tomorrow. Before you think that sounds like relief, it isn't. These storms won't deliver meaningful rainfall. The rain evaporates long before it ever reaches the ground. What they will deliver is dry lightning, striking bone-dry grass beneath wind gusts that could hit 60 millipers and push a fire in any direction without warning. Any fire that gets started under those conditions becomes instantly unpredictable and extraordinarily difficult to contain. Outdoor burning is completely off the table in this zone right now. If you're in eastern Montana or the Dakotas this week, stay alert. The fire threat is real, it is immediate, and it can move far faster than most people expect. Third, a genuine bright spot. Let's take a breath, because there is actually some good news tucked into this week, and it deserves a moment. If you're in or near St. Louis, Des Moines, Springfield, Missouri, or Cedar Rapids, Thursday, May 14th is shaping up to be one of the finest weather days you've enjoyed all spring. And that's not an exaggeration. A broad area of high pressure is settling over the region, sweeping cloud cover aside for most of the day. Morning lows will feel crisp and refreshing, dipping into the low to mid-40s. Afternoon, highs will climb to somewhere between 75 and close to 80 degrees. Dew points in the 50s and lower 60s mean it'll actually feel comfortable, not sticky, not heavy, not the kind of humid thickness that makes you want to go back inside immediately. Cloud cover sits around 22% at midday, nudging up slightly through the afternoon, but the chance of rain is essentially zero for the bulk of the day. That is a genuinely rare combination for the Midwest in May. And if you've been waiting for a good reason to spend a few hours outside, Thursday morning through early afternoon is your window. Just keep one thing in mind. The UV index is pushing toward 8 on a mostly clear day like this. If you're planning to be outdoors for more than a short stretch, sunscreen is not optional, it's just common sense. For the surrounding plains, Thursday will still be a pleasant day. Perhaps a touch breezier and with a bit more warmth building to the south and west. Enjoy it either way, because this pattern doesn't stick around. The atmosphere has other plans for the weekend. Fourth, Saturday's severe weather. Outbreak marks Saturday, May 16th on your calendar right now. The Storm Prediction Center already has a 15% risk area stretching from central Oklahoma up through southern Kansas. The window for the most dangerous activity runs roughly from 3 in the afternoon through 9 in the evening, and that timing is no coincidence. It lands squarely in the maximum instability window, the stretch after peak daytime heating when the atmosphere is most coiled and ready for explosive storm development. A surge of energy, pushing east out of the Rockies, is going to collide with deep moisture and strong, upper-level southwest flow building across the southern plains by late in the week. That is a classic textbook severe weather setup for this part of the country, and the forecast models are coming into increasingly tight agreement on it as we get closer. The primary threats right now look like large hail, the kind that cracks vehicle hoods, shatters windshields, and craters rooftops, along with damaging wind gusts strong enough to tear limbs from mature trees and knock out power across wide areas. An isolated tornado cannot be ruled out, and as the event draws closer and the picture sharpens, that tornado threat may become more clearly defined.